Good evening. I will now call the April 9th, 2024 Bend the Pines Schools Budget Committee meeting to order. I'd like to introduce our participants this evening, Budget Committee members, Vice Chair Robert Penson, Kara Marsh Rhodes, Ned Lutz, Sharon Belushi, Seth Eisenberg, Chief Financial and Operations Officer Brad Henry, Finance Manager Leah Bebo, Board Vice Chair Marcus LeGrand, Director Amy Tatum, Director Carrie McPherson Douglas, Director Cameron Fisher, Director Shirley Olson, Superintendent Steve Cook, Deputy Superintendent Laura Nordquist, Board Clerk, I'm sorry, this is incorrect, Janet Bojanowski, and I'm Chair Natasha McFarland. We also have Erin Trimble and Hannah Westfall joining us for ASL interpretation. Dr. Cook, are there any changes to the agenda?
There are no changes to the agenda.
Thank you. Fellow committee members, are there any changes to the agenda? Thank you. Hearing no requests for changes, we'll proceed with the agenda as noticed. We'll now move to agenda item 3, public comment. I want to remind the public that while this is a meeting that takes place in public, it is not a meeting with the public. It is a meeting of the Budget Committee meeting to conduct board business. As such, the committee will not respond to public comment made during tonight's meeting. We will now open for public comment. Our policy is to allow up to 2 minutes per speaker. A timer is provided on the large screen to ensure every speaker receives updates during the presentation on remaining time. If the speaker goes over time, or if the speaker's message is not in adherence with our policies, for example, being personally directed, abusive, discriminatory, repetitive, or off topic, I may ask the speaker to cease and terminate that speaker's privilege to address the committee. At this time, we'll hear from Greg Heacock.
It doesn't appear that Greg is here.
Having no other requests for public comments, we'll move on to our agenda. The first item on our agenda is the election of Budget Committee officers. At this time, I'll entertain a motion for the 2024-2025 Budget Committee Chair. I would like to nominate Kara Marsh Rhodes as Chair. Do I have a second?
You have a second.
Thank you. At this time, I'll call for a vote. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Any abstentions? Wonderful. So at this point, with a unanimous vote.
Tasha?
Oh, yes.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
Kara will need to abstain from that vote.
Oh.
So can you
Any
use the
abstentions? Kara Marsh Rhodes has abstained from the vote. So with all in favor with one abstention, Kara Marsh Rhodes is the 2024-25 Budget Committee Chair. Thank you. At this time, I'll entertain a motion for the 2024-25 Budget Committee Vice Chair. Are there any motions? Nominations?
I will nominate Natasha McFarland as the 2023-24 or 24-25 Vice Chair.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I second that motion.
Thank you. Are there any other nominations? So at this time, I'll call for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Any abstentions? I abstain. With a vote of all in favor except for my abstention, Natasha McFarland is the 2024-25 Budget Committee Vice Chair. Thank you very much. We'll move on to our reports section. At this time, we'll hear from Superintendent Cook for the budget message, followed by Brad Henry, Chief Operations and Financial Officer, with the proposed 2024-25 budget document. And then Dr. Cook will speak to the local option levy. Dr. Cook?
Thank you, Natasha. Esteemed members of the Budget Committee, Ben Lapine School staff, students, families, community members, and our board. As we start the budget process for the 24-25 school year, it is vital that we reflect on whether we have delivered upon the commitments we've made as good stewards of our taxpayers' dollars. Whether we are using taxpayer dollars for staffing, providing updated instructional materials, or enhancing our infrastructure, we take great responsibility of stewardship and community engagement. We take it very seriously in Ben Lapine Schools. Deciding how to spend public dollars in service of the district goals is done with intentionality, with public input, and with feedback. Over the past several years, we have dedicated substantial time and effort to engage our community in crucial conversations regarding the visioning of the district. The feedback and listening sessions have given us clear priorities about what our community wants and the needs for our students and families we serve. We have historically built our budget on the promise that each Ben Lapine School student is known by name, strength, and need, and that they graduate ready for college, career, community engagement in life. To this end, the Ben Lapine Schools Board of Education established goals that serve as this true north for our system. Goal 1, students develop a strong academic foundation. Goal 2, students have a passion, purpose, and a plan for their future. Goal 3, students, families, and staff experience inclusion and belonging in our schools. And Goal 4, all of our operational systems align and support an academically effective and sustainable organization. Significantly, this past year, we established a district culture and climate task force composed of classroom educators, support staff, and building and district administrators to collaboratively tackle challenges in our schools and determine how best to deliver on the goals of the district. These collaborative conversations continue to provide invaluable insights into how we can better support our staff and optimize learning experiences within the fiscal constraints imposed by the state funding formula. As a part of the integrated planning process required by Oregon Department of Education, and to ensure alignment with community expectations, we have engaged in substantive discussions with students and families across the district to assess our progress ensuring student success. Are we focusing on the right factors with the greatest impact on student success? Are we truly preparing graduates for the demands of college, career, and civic engagement? Are our systems the most effective and efficient they can be to produce the outcomes our families and community want and expect for our students? These are the questions that require our collective attention. From our conversations with these stakeholders, we know that our staff, students, families, and community believe that the following ideals are very high priorities: that we strengthen and add career technical education pathways, that we work hard to protect and maintain our class sizes, that we put efforts into recruiting and retaining teachers and support staff, that we work to increase advanced academic offerings for students, that we work to improve support systems for struggling students, and we also enhance elective offerings across the district, including music, art, technology, business, and world languages. The 24-25 budget is designed to reflect this feedback, refining our use of resources to provide the best learning environment for students in Ben Lapine Schools. And finally, I'm pleased to confirm that this proposed budget adheres to the requirement outlined in Ben Lapine Schools Executive Limitation 4.3, which is about financial planning and administration. This policy requires proposing a budget with an ending fund balance of at least equal to 5% of resources in the general fund operating budget. We are truly grateful for your ongoing support of Ben Lapine Schools, and in collaborative partnership, Dr. Stephen Cook.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to tonight's meeting. Joel, you want to put the presentation up? I will. So in front of you, I've given each of you a copy of our 24-25 proposed budget for your consideration, as well as a couple of variance reports that show the explain any of the large variances between last proposed and this proposed, or our current forecasted actuals. Those are provided for you as well. In addition, I have copies of the slide presentation that we're going to go through tonight as part of this presentation. Normally each year, we do kind of an in-depth walkthrough of each of the sections of the budget document, but this year we're going to take a slightly different approach and just hit on some of the highlight foundational items that we used to put our budget assumptions together for this year. The detail behind my presentation can be found on pages 23 to 26 in the budget document if you want to read some of the more details behind this presentation. All right. After we're done with tonight's presentation and the Budget Committee has a chance to review the documents, I'm sure you're going to possibly have additional questions that we haven't answered. I sent everybody an email last night with the link where to submit those. If everybody can get those back to us by end of day, Friday, May 3rd, then we'll have a week to comprise all of our answers and get them back to you before the next official meeting. And so we'll get started on the presentation. Uh-oh. There we go. So this first slide covers a little bit of a foundation around the state's biennium budgeting process. I think you've seen it a number of times in some various presentations. We wanted to point out that back in the biennium of 21-23, our state increase for the state school fund was only at 3.3%. This required the district, as was widely communicated, to use a lot of the one-time federal funds that we received, as well as some of our reserve balances, in order to continue to support our current service levels and programs. ESSER, those one-time federal funds, just for your information, through the course of this, these budgetary cycles, covered approximately 30 to 40 positions on average. In addition, those ESSER funds were used this year to cover about $6 million worth of our general fund balance, so that we have an opportunity to carry forward some reserves into next year, which I'll talk about here in a little bit. So to start off, I'd like to talk a little bit about revenue projections. A lot of our budget cycles, we focus on just the revenue projections coming up in the current fiscal year in order to really see where the district is going and where the position we're going to find ourselves in with that elimination of those one-time funds. The 10K group, which is a collaboration of finance folks from the districts around the state that have over 10,000 students, we've worked together to create a document that takes the state economist's forecast for state funds and lottery funds and try to project it forward on kind of a growth trend for the coming years. Right now, the state economists are forecasting about a 6.18% increase for next biennium in their revenues. If we presume that the schools continue to get their prorated share, and we have the allocations of 49% of our revenues in year one and 51% in year two. The depressing news is year over year, it's only a 2% increase in our allocation of funding between 24-25 and 25-26. So this is one of the reasons why we were structuring ourselves to carry over some of our additional reserves to try to make sure we can continue to cover our revenue needs. Slide 2 or slide 3. Next, and I know this is a lot of numbers and it's a very busy schedule, but slide 3 is a look at our projections for taking those revenues and projecting our expenses going forward. We have our agreements in place with our employees through the 24-25 year, and we know our revenues for 24-25. Anything beyond that, we've had to put in some high-level assumptions on where we're going. We've budgeted about 1.8% wage increases for our natural steps, as well as a 3% COLA and a 4% insurance cap. Again, these are our budgetary forecasts. These have nothing to do with where, any agreements. We also have factored in a 2.5% PERS rate increase. You'll notice in the budget document that our PERS rates are forecasted to start climbing. That's over $3 million per year of additional costs that we're currently not having. We also built in a 10% reduction in what we call our non-salary discretionary money. Now, Non-salary discretionary, that's going to be your supplies and things like that, but there are a certain number of items like utilities and software licenses, fuel that you can't just arbitrarily cut 10% out of. So what we have found is that our projected increases, even in those areas, are still going to outpace any 10% reduction we may put in. So that's why you still see even our discretionary costs going up over the year over year. So what does this mean for us over time? Over time, if we make no reductions whatsoever in our staffing, we are looking at ending the 25-26 year in a deficit position. So by planning for reductions in the 24-25 year through attrition, retirements, resignations, those kinds of things, we buy ourselves some time to wait until we see how future funding turns out for the state. If it is as we have estimated, we're going to need to continue to make further reductions in order to maintain our mandatory 5% ending fund balance. So I actually got these two backwards, so let's talk about what's the plan first. So what we built in the 24-25 plan is about 3% reduction in positions in the general fund. This is approximately 58 positions. Again, we're banking on those to be from attritions, retirements, people leaving and moving on. We want to reassess once the 25-27 state school funding is actually finalized and see where we end up. If there is no increase in funding through alternative sources, we are going to be looking at proposing approximately a 7% staffing reduction in the 25-26 year, which will be about 130 positions. Uh-oh. Hello, Dr. Cook. You have a
Hello,
question?
I just want to
Interject.
add to this. The 60, roughly 58 to 60 positions that we were talking about for the 24-25 year, the one that you've heard me mention, that those are pending as we speak, can be done through attrition. And right now, there aren't necessarily names of people in those jobs. If we have to additionally add another 120 to 130 positions for the 25-26 year, those we won't have the luxury of just being able to use attrition only. We would actually have to go through a RIF process to reduce the number of staff that would be hired by the district. We don't have the ability to do that with just attrition alone.
Just a quick question on that. The reduction through attrition, my assumption is that it's very unlikely that the 58 positions that we need to reduce are matched up perfectly to the 58 people who happen to be retiring. So in past experience, does that also tend to result in a lot more movement across schools and grades and other movement when you're trying to reduce positions with attrition, or any additional insight there?
No, excellent question. And I think the first thing I would say is that it starts, like, the positions are distributed based on, we're doing it in a pro rata manner, which means that out of our 4 groups, our certified group, our classified group, our confidential group, and our BLAST group, which is our administrators, that we're taking equivalent percentages overall out of each of those groups and that's where those 60 total positions lie. And so those positions, in some regards, those positions, what's happening is it's being done at a funding level to establish how the new funding is going to be distributed. And so if you recall, when the last time we talked, we really had a couple of mechanisms for how we would step into that. We could either agree to change the funding model for how we staff our buildings by modifying the number of, the target class sizes, or we could hit the areas where we are using our funds to do targeted class size reduction. And we chose to do the latter, which was to reduce the number of certified positions in that total. And so what you wind up with, I think it's fair to say, and I don't know, I'm generalizing here to some extent, that about 90 to 92% of our staffing is fairly distributed each year. And then we do kind of the next fill-in are either temporary positions or positions based upon need to fill in those gaps. And that's where we would see positions potentially people being moved from I was a temporary teacher at Juniper, and now I'm going to be a temporary teacher at Innsworth, something like that. And so there will be some shuffling, but that's true every year when we build the staffing models for the system because we're such a large district.
Can I ask a quick question? And I think there's been a little discrepancy with regard to the 58 to 60 positions. Can you just remind me of the breakdown with classified versus certified?
So I'm going to try to do this from memory. I think it's 55% of our staff are certified, 38% of our staff are classified, a little less than 1% of our staff are in confidential group, and about 6% of our staff are building and district administration.
And so that reduction, you're just, there's kind of the umbrella of under that. You don't know for certain, like of the 58 to 60 positions, which buckets?
You asking me how many certified, how many classified? Yeah.
Guesstimate.
I think it was 32 positions in certified. We targeted 22 positions in classified, but struggled to get to all 22. So I think right now, as we stand, we've only identified 16 to 18 positions that we would still target those before the beginning of school next year to continue to get to the 22. Less than, none in confidential because it's less than one position in such a small group, and then 4 total positions in administration.
Thank you.
Excuse me, Leah, when is the target date for the final state budget?
Well, we know what our funding for the state budget is for the 24-25 year. The 25-26 year, we will usually end up entering into and approving our budget before the final numbers are known. So even when we go into 25-26, we'll be running with whatever the state is kind of intending or announcing. We usually have an idea, but like last biennium, we came into it believing it was going to be 9.9, and then it ended up, we didn't find out till after we passed the budget, it was 10.2. So there's always a little bit of time lag there as well.
Thank you.
Sorry, one more question. If our community passes the levy, is it those 58 positions that would be retained, or is it different positions based on the levy priority?
You're so cheating and getting ahead of the work, but I
Okay.
will answer this question.
Feel free to wait.
No, the answer to that question is I would expect, we would talk about each and every one of them, but my expectation is that the people that would be at the root of the answers to those questions would tell us that every single one of those positions is imperative to replace, and those would be the positions that constitute the 60 positions that we would be pushing back into the system. And I'll say that again when we talk about the levy as well, just to remind folks.
All right, I just have one more comment, and that's for everybody who's talking out there to your local legislatures and talking to the state is, you know, if we were to have to rely on the state and not the levy, the 25 to 27 biennium, we'd be needing to look at about a 16.6% increase biennium over biennium, which is fairly unlikely given their history. So go out and advocate for your state representatives. More school funds. So again, send in your questions and we will respond to them en masse once I have them all consolidated. Thank you.
I would just like to double down on that advocacy conversation. That particular amount in the 25 to 27 biennium just happens to match up exactly with ODE's quality education model amount of 11.9 for this biennium. So I just want to draw special attention to that just in case you're interested in making phone calls or emails or texting some of our local legislators.
Thank you, and as usual, thank you so much to your whole team. Oh,
Sorry, I have one more question before you pass it to Kara. I know a small percentage of these reductions are due to a decrease in enrollment, in which case we don't actually need, like, it makes sense that a few positions lower would match a decrease in enrollment. can you give like an approximate number of those positions or approximate percentage that's specifically related to decreased enrollment as opposed to not enough money from the state?
Yes, glad to. So that's a process that happens outside of the budget process every single year, whether enrollment goes up or enrollment goes down. We're making a maneuver to do appropriate staffing decisions based upon that alone, and it starts out formulaically to ensure that we've got enough staff. And in this regard, the reduction, the proposed reduction in this budget that you're seeing based upon slight enrollment decreases means we're removing 17 positions from the system that sits outside of the budget process.
So 17 in addition to 58 or 17 of those 58?
In addition to the
Oh, wow.
58, correct.
Okay. Thank you.
And I do want to remind us that those are positions and that this is a process that will happen over time as we do this, because that's how we staff. We will be hiring classified and certified positions probably all the way up until almost the beginning of school, in some cases even after school starts. And so this is a process that happens over time. Okay, so that's my very subtle clue from everybody that it's time to talk about how does the levy play into this. And so I want to take just a minute to just talk about the language that kind of got us into this conversation. So it would entertain me for a minute. Bend Lapine Schools, as the 5th largest district in Oregon, faces critical challenges in adequately funding our educational system. Despite our dedication to providing quality education, the state's funding falls significantly short of recommended levels. This funding gap jeopardizes essential services and initiatives vital for the success for our students and our staff. Exacerbating this significant challenge is the impending expiration of our ESSER dollars, which stands for Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Funds, which has provided temporary relief but is now set to end. And I want to pause here and I want to remind us that had they funded in the 21-23 biennium at the average rate that they were funding, this would not be the case right now. And I just want to make sure that that's clear. That 3.3% funding rate, when you divide it by effectively 2, because of 49-51 split, was a 1.6% per year increase, which when you come off of that 49-51 split from the previous year, actually was a decrease in funding for that operational year. Okay, editorial over. Additionally, the state increased funding by only 3.3% in the previous 21-23 biennium, making it clear that the expectation from state legislators was that districts utilize the one-time ESSER dollars to fill in any gaps. To say that this increase was insufficient is an understatement, considering inflation, increased costs for insurance and PERS, and growing needs of students across the state. The consequences of this shortfall is alarming. Districts statewide face the harsh reality of significant staffing reductions once ESSER funds dry up. Given that 85% of our expenditures are on personnel, these cuts threaten the very fabric of our educational environment. Additionally, as I spoke on earlier, our community has long-term strong commitment to public education. With feedback from our students, staff, and community, we've identified 6 strategic priorities that require additional funding to adequately meet the needs of our students and staff effectively. Number 1, a commitment to the protection of class sizes. Adding teaching staff, which would include potentially restoring those that we are just now recommending that we are cutting. Adding teaching staff across all, and classified staff across all levels of the district to maintain optimal learning environments. We anticipate allocating, if the levy were to pass, about $7.7 million to this and an additional 67 FTE. Number 2, enhance student support systems, investing in additional counselors, educational assistants, learning and language specialists, campus monitors to ensure the success of each and every student. We anticipate this total to be about $8.25 million and approximately 76.8 FTE. FTE is full-time equivalent for those of you who are interested. Number 3, expansions of advanced academic offerings, increasing advanced placement courses, international baccalaureate sections, adding course offerings for dual credit opportunities and other advanced classes for a total just shy of $1 million and 6 additional FTE. Diversified elective offerings, increasing opportunities at all levels for fine arts as well as world languages in middle and high schools to increase student engagement and provide well-rounded education for our student population, $770,000 and 5 additional FTE. Number 5, improved career technical education pathways, creating better access and pathways for CTE in high schools and introducing additional courses in our middle schools. We anticipate $1.78 million and 9 additional FTE here. Staff recruitment and retention, providing additional training, mentoring opportunities, and extended onboarding days to attract and retain quality staff across our district for a total of $1.75 million and 3 additional FTE. Without any of this additional funding, local funding to support our priorities, the district anticipates cutting approximately 200 teaching, classified, and administrative positions across the district in the next 2 years, approximately 9% of our workforce. This year alone, we will be reducing the budgeted positions by approximately 3%, which translates to approximately 60 staff cuts as well as reductions in discretionary spending to balance the budget. One thing I might add is that we would also intend to restore those discretionary cuts across the system. If the levy were to pass, those funds would be reallocated back out to the system. However, with the support of the local levy, we can circumvent the need for these detrimental cuts over the next 2 years. Moreover, it will also allow us to invest in the aforementioned strategic priorities. The local levy will safeguard the quality of education in Ben Lapine schools and ensure that our students and staff receive the resources and support they need to thrive in our system.
Steve, is that what you just spoke to? Is that in the board packet? I don't know that our budget committee members have a copy of that.
It is in the board packet and online, and if we want to go print this, we could, if you think that would help.
Okay. Do you guys want a hard copy? Okay.
Yeah.
We'll do that before you guys leave. How's that? Or I can do it now if you guys want to look at it. No? You're
Do we
good?
have questions? Maybe we start there. Or do we need the hard copy before we go into Q&A?
Would it not be helpful to have the hard copy so that
Did you print
we
it, Janet?
reiterate what
Okay,
you
I'll go get them.
presented? Thanks, Brad.
While they're going to get those documents, I just want to make sure that it's clear that we are actually treating these as separate kind of entities. We're treating the budget as we're building the budget and asking for consideration on a budget that is outside of incorporating any aspect of a local levy so that you know and understand what you would be voting on, what you'd be signing off on, and what we would be advocating for. What I do think is important, though, is that we are also being explicitly clear on what the levy would do in supplementation of the budget if the levy were to pass, so that it's clear how we're using our strategic priorities and how we are using those dollars if it passes to allocate those funds and to ensure that the impact is being felt in the classroom.
And Dr. Cook, I asked this during the last board meeting, but for our budget committee members, can you just review the timeline again as far as when will we find out the levy results and how does that play into any votes or decisions that they might be making with us?
Yeah, the vote, election day is May 21st. The county clerk has told us that they anticipate that it'll be anywhere from 5 to 7 days post that date before we would have results. Because these funds are received through property taxes, they would be administered that fall. So the November administration of the property tax allotment would make those funds available to us in November of this year. That would allow us to budget, if this were to pass, that would allow us to use the anticipated reception of these funds in building the budget for this incoming year. And so that's a really important designation. A November ballot would not allow that because we wouldn't be able to collect those funds on a November ballot until the following November. And so in that regards, this would be as early as receiving these for the 24-25 budget year.
And to the committee, I'd like to point out too, in order for us to have the appropriate legal appropriations to spend those funds in anticipation of hopefully passing the levy, if you look on page 95 of your budget document, you will see that we have budgeted in a separate fund those estimated revenues should the levy pass. And then we will keep all of the actual charges in comparison to the collections, and the revenues will be held and accounted for separately, but they will be included in the budget appropriations should you choose to adopt and approve this budget. Obviously, if those funds were to fail to happen, it's isolated for that reason as well, that then they would just can't spend what you don't have. But I wanted you just to know that's why we do have a separate section in here so that they can be isolated and reported out years going forward.
And
If
that's,
the levy does pass, will you be revising the general fund budget? How does that work?
So, Kara, it's like our athletics and our instructional materials. We have all those general operating sub-funds where we track things in isolation, but from an ODE perspective, they're consolidated together as what we call the general fund. So there won't be a need to revise this other than if future findings changes the way we want to dedicate the funds, but the funds will have already been appropriated, so we'll have the right to spend them. Does that make sense?
and I'd like to add on to that, just that we anticipate doing this if the levy passes, we anticipate doing this and keeping this separated for tracking purposes for the near future. In 5 years, if it does pass in 5 years, our taxpayers are going to want to know did we allocate it and say that we spent it the way that we promised we would? And so having that separated in that manner gives us an ability to be very transparent about the use of those dollars and how they were being earmarked and allocated.
I just want a clarifying question. And you mentioned with the decrease of those 57 positions, it would be pro rata across the various departments, I think. Is there any kind of, to me, I guess I'll just convey what I believe, is there an opportunity to be more strategic in as far as the reallocation of those dollars? If this levy were to pass, are we going to pro rata redistribute back into those places that it was eliminated from?
That's exactly, maybe you heard me qualify it. That's exactly the right comment, which is it the best reallocation of each of those dollars? And we would have that conversation. My guess is that our principals that are in the process right now of building staffing plans for how they're going to earmark next year based upon enrollment and needs. And even remember that the same up and down that we have with our enrollments, we're down overall by, we're anticipating being down by about 100 students, a very small decrease, but that doesn't evenly distribute amongst our 33 schools. And so I'm guessing that most of our principals would tell you not only do they need those positions, but they need the ones that we're potentially going to be adding to. And so there will be those conversations about whether or not that's the best, most strategic use of those dollars. And I would add also that we've already committed when we talked about reducing administrative positions. There's only 128 administrative positions top to bottom in the entire district, and that most of those are allocated to buildings right now, and that the feedback from not just our administrators in schools, but feedback from our staffing in schools is that reduction of administrative positions in schools could be potentially devastating for the system. And so those absorptions of those positions that we're talking about when we talk about the reductions in BLAST are being centrally located. So we will pull those positions out of effectively district office and other departments that are outside of operational departments outside of schools.
I know, one quick comment on that, and then another comment. I know that feels like the right thing to do, and our central office is already very, very lean. So I just want to name that. Our operations are important. Kind of related to Ned's question, like even without budget cuts, how do you think about, like over time, districts, as with all businesses and nonprofits, tend to add a lot of initiatives and ideas and concepts and people. What's the process for deciding that an initiative is no longer the right thing to invest in, or that we actually should take some money away kind of strategically from an area, even if it's something we're doing this year? Like, what is the process for that, for those more strategic cuts?
First of all, it's very difficult when you have conversations about unimplementation of an initiative of something, or pulling back from, like, let's use one that's a perfect example. School districts for years have been providing athletics for students, and I am not suggesting to anyone that we do anything to reduce athletics, but I want to use that as an example. Typically, what you have to do when you want to talk about de-implementation of something is you start to have to build that conversation and create I guess have dialogue around making meaning as to why we believe this isn't the most useful use of our dollars. And typically when you start those conversations, de-implementation of an initiative means also, remember, 85% of our dollars are spent on people. It also means that we're now talking about potentially taking positions away in the system that are filled by people. And so it gets to be a fairly emotionally challenging conversation to have, but it's still an important one nonetheless. And I think that's when you think about all the different ways we've spent significant amounts of money in the 3 years I've been here and going back many years before that, those decisions weren't made lightly. You know, we're on limited dollars, right? Like, we get what we get from the state, and we have to figure out how to maximize. And so people in chairs that we fill now, maybe perhaps, or even some of us, we're advocating for why we believe this to be effective. And so now we would be having the conversations about, we believe there might be a more effective answer. And so it's a very challenging conversation to have, but it's an important one that we have to consider as well.
And I just wanted to add, Director McPherson-Douglas, when we talk about those certified positions in particular, all that staffing is what we call our HU staffing, our historically underserved staffing. So certified staff that our level leaders look at strategically at each level, saying, La Pine High School needs 0.5 for a counselor. Juniper Elementary, you know, has large class sizes at 4th grade, so we're going to, you know, so it's really about class size reduction and critical, like, counseling, mental health support services. That, I'm just speaking to the certified staffing there, but none of that staff is associated with a particular initiative other than class size reduction, strategically done at the schools that have the most need, and counseling in particular, but maybe some other mental health supports. And they're divvied out like gold there, and to have those cut in half for next year has a real impact in our schools.
And let me give you a really specific example that aligns exactly with your question. Right now in our elementary schools, we have targets ranging from 22 at K in kindergarten and 1st grade, going up to a high of 29? No, 31 in 4th and 5th grade. Right now, 50% of all of our classes in elementary school are at least 3 or more students below those targets. So one could argue that's a value that we are artificially putting because we are significantly below some of our suggested targets. And we are choosing that based upon how we're allocating. Now, it's not always as easy as, okay, let's just do the math to reduce another X number of teachers because it doesn't work that way. But it also speaks to the values of what we have and how we're choosing to spend money to try to maintain those class sizes. And I say this all over the system when people ask about our class sizes. Do the research. We measure up very well across districts, comparable districts our size, that on classroom, on student-to-teacher ratio in our classrooms. And so that's a good example of how we've chosen to maximize spending. We're light downtown. We don't have nearly as many administrators in a downtown kind of situation, and we've got more teachers in systems right now. And so that's a conversation that we talk about with the unions quite a bit.
I'm so sorry, you guys. Can you remind us, because districts vary so widely on this point, about how much autonomy principals and school site staff have to decide how to allocate their FTEs? Like, do we give them FTEs and we say, you know, and every high school needs at least these positions, or how much decision-making happens at the school level around positions versus centrally?
The vast majority of the decision-making happens at the building level. Now, there are categories that that they get certified staffing, classified staffing, counselors / other support, so there is some flexibility, but I think our level leaders would tell you that those are side-by-side conversations, especially, so sometimes it's like, I need 2 more sections of language arts, so maybe I'm going to have a little less classified time and convert that into those sections. But those discussions happen with level leaders by their side. So they wouldn't have complete autonomy. If we had a middle school say, we don't really need counselors, I just want campus monitors, we would not allow that to happen. But there is some flexibility, or we need a little more office support, so maybe my media manager works an hour less a day so I can get critical office support when the only secretary has to take a lunch break. So that kind of flexibility, but I really see it as a partnership, and the level leaders are very involved in that process. But yeah, they do a lot. They're pretty magical about doing a lot with not enough, but they're strained.
Okay, thank you. And one last question prompt, which you don't have to answer tonight, but I believe these are the largest potential cuts that I've seen in my 7 years on the board. And I'm just thinking that both Brad and Laura are leaving us, and you have like the historical experience of having gone through the last big recessions and big cuts. And so I just would love to know at some point over this budget process if there are any lessons learned, or did you think it was smart to make cuts somewhere that sounded good and it ended up with unintended consequences, or just anything we should learn about prior cuts like this before you leave us partially or fully?
I had one question about the calculation of the levy. So if this was deemed to be something we're going to move ahead with in terms of approving, what's who does the calculation relative to what the levy looks like to the population, et cetera? Yeah, go out to voters.
Seth, specifically to what aspect of the calculation? Are you talking about there's several things here. The county clerk is the one that would do it based upon the overall property values of the dollar per thousand. Are you speaking to that?
Yeah, that's what I was trying to get at, was how that would when that would get calculated and what the rough impact of it was. But.
Yeah, and so we had to meet the expectations of the county clerk. The first thing we had to do was, Brad, you've got a mic within an arm's reach. He's going to correct me because I'm going to mess this up, but I'm going to try. I'm going to try and do this. The first thing we had to account for was understanding what compression is. And compression is when your property taxes and the value of your house are fairly close. The overall tax value is limited. We can't go above an overall tax value. And if so, then you're given the lower number of what's accessible. And so if your property taxes and your actual real market value of your property are fairly close, then there's a reduced in the amount that you would be afforded in that way. And so we had to do the estimated math on what we believe compression to be each year of the 5 years that we would receive that. And so the overall math on $1 per thousand is reduced by the difference of what compression is. B, A,
So,
C.
yeah, that was well done. The good news is that we don't have to do any of that going forward. The assessor actually does all of that math. And so on the levy is we chose to go with $1 per thousand instead of here's a dollar amount. So the assessor knows exactly what, what that levy would be. And so on a property by property basis, the assessor will assess that $1 per thousand. And some will be compressed, not much right now, but there are some like utility properties that have some compression. Most residential properties do not in our boundaries. So well done, Steve.
And I think the only other calculation we were required to incorporate was an estimate of what we anticipated the increase to be over the 5 years based upon growth of the community and the increase in property taxes. And so you see in the language that we presented to the county clerk, our best guesstimate over what 5 years from now would be regarding the amount collected through this levy.
I have a question. I have a question about the levy and the distribution of those funds. Does that go into specifically into the general fund? Or is it earmarked specifically for those 6 different projects or priorities?
Well, it's a supplemental budget to the general fund budget. So you would see going forward, you would see that it would be incorporated in the general fund, but we are taking action to separate it and partition it off so that it can be tracked annually, so that the way that it's being allocated is clear to our constituents, and that in 5 years, and when I say I think it's very rare that once a district does seek a levy to pass, that they're going to forego it in the 5 years, because there will be substantial number of our positions in there. But one of the things that we want to do is be explicitly clear about how those dollars are being spent, so that the public and our voters know and understand that we're living by the commitments we said we would live by.
So those are earmarked then, that those monies are earmarked specifically for those projects and not thrown into the general fund and distributed where we need them versus going to those specific projects?
That's correct. They would be earmarked.
Can I ask a question? So if the levy does not pass, are there any non-negotiables around the cuts? And I ask that around the area of foundational reading, some of the things that we've really invested in that help boost academic achievement and actually decrease costs downstream. Is there anything on the list that would be a non-negotiable in terms of cutting?
So Sharon, I want you to save that question. If the levy doesn't pass, that's the next year question. Right now, we're doing a really nice job of keeping this away from intentional programming that we have. And it's just by doing it through attrition and attrition alone, it gives us the flexibility. If we get to a place, for example, I think we targeted 22 classified positions. If we get to a place where we've reduced 17 or 18 of them and we can't go any further without actually taking somebody's job away from them, we'll stop there. And so this year, we won't see any kind of overall negative impact on some of our high targeted spaces, the places where we've put a lot of financial and resource investment over the last 3 or 4 years. But next year, that's a real concern for me, because when we talk about reducing 3% this year, we can do that. I don't want to say it's fairly easy by any means, but we can do that without actually talking about people's jobs. A 7% reduction if the levy doesn't pass, and what the economists are predicting they're going to be funding schools at comes true, it's going to be a much more challenging conversation to build a budget that will meet those expectations for next year. And I think that's the question that needs to be at the forefront of our conversation: is what are the values and what are the things that we hold the most dear that we say can't be impacted.
And Sharon, I'd just like to add for next year, like we anticipate no cuts in our instructional coaches for the elementary school. Class size, we'll see some impact, but no cuts to interventionists, no cuts to instructional support, no cuts to professional development or materials. So again, it's a conversation for a year down the road. We're grateful that we also have the early literacy grant, so that's giving us another $1 million to help support the work.
Are there other questions?
I'll ask one more question. So if I'm a member of the public and I look at our priorities and I know that we know that there are cuts coming in terms of the amount of money that we're going to be getting from the state, and I'm seeing additions in the levy, and I'm sort of doing the math here, are we kicking the can down the road to be adding new stuff to our budget when we still are looking at, in terms of the future cuts coming up?
Fantastic question. And I think what I would say is I think to some extent the way we're presenting this, because we have to present the budget as a standalone and present the local levy as a standalone, creates a little bit of dynamic that exacerbates exactly what you're asking. And I think the answer to John Q. Public about what would happen if, first one is if we make what are the recommended budget cuts to meet this year's budget and the levy passes and we invest in those areas where we say we are adding resources, that through the use of the 5 years of the levy can be maintained so that we aren't facing those cuts every year, each year. And so it'll be interesting. This is, and I'll say this, I'll try to predict the future just a little bit. We've had audience with the governor's office, speaking directly to the governor about the challenges of this budget, this 23-24 year budget, and how challenging it was to go into this with a lot of unknowns and how we are coming out of that. With understanding like that, I don't want to underestimate the importance of that 3.3% 2 biennia ago, and how now we're facing this, and districts across the state. PPS is facing it. Salem-Keiser's in the middle of this right now, where they're talking about substantial cuts without the possibility of a levy to relieve that pressure. And so this is going to be the center of the conversation, both in districts that are going through bargaining this spring, and next year when we start the long session, it is going to be at the forefront. And I believe that there is going to be a lot of pressure to take, I think, what was it, 16.7% is what Leah told us it would take to fill the gaps that currently exist. There are going to be people that say that's how much we should be funding public education in the state of Oregon. And so it'll be a very interesting long session next spring.
I have one more question about the grant process, and how does that work with our current budget and in our future budgets as well? And what are we doing as a school district with grants?
So let me speak specifically to the grant. The one that I think we talked about a little bit earlier is the early literacy grant. It's a pretty robust process, and districts are by size given an ability to apply for that grant, and we did, just like most of the districts in the state. And it's a 2-year grant in which you're funded to implement initiatives that are going to support early literacy. And so we attack grants vigorously. We're one of the districts in the region that actually have somebody that is a full-time grant writer that specifically focuses on receiving additional funds for the district's support. Typically, grants are highly focused, restricted dollars that can be used for a certain aspect. Our partnership with the ESD also allows us to expand the ability for us to apply for grants that we wouldn't otherwise qualify for by that partnership. And I think, gosh, what is it? 47% of the funds the ESD is in support of are actually grant funds that are used to serve programs across the region. And so we're an active participant in that process. For example, one of the There's a new grant that was just allocated $30 million out of the governor's budget. I don't know if you happen to see that, but this promotion of summer learning, and it was a $30 million grant for districts across the state to apply, but this was not based upon size. It was based upon their definition of how you are identified as need. And out of all of the possible applicants, I think there were 300 possible choices. We ranked 236th out of 300. And so those grant dollars will likely not be available to us because of how we can access those dollars. And so it's a broad question. I hope that was kind of where you were seeking to get an answer from, Robert. We've got a lot of grants in this district, and we partner with ESD to get a lot more grants too.
Yeah, I was just curious about how aggressive we were going after that.
Other questions? Okay. The next Budget Committee meeting is scheduled for May 14th, 2024 at 5 p.m. With that said, this meeting is adjourned.